thanks so much for joining me on this free webinar. My name's Tim Walk. I'm excited to be able to share with you this idea, this message of how to cut your sermon time in half. And I want to give you the why behind the what, but I also want to be incredibly practical, and I also want to be respectful of your time, which means get all of this done in 30 minutes. So let's see how we do. First of all, my name's Tim Walk. I've been in youth ministry for the last 9 years, and as a full-time youth pastor, and before that, 5 years as a volunteer junior high pastor. And I started out in full-time ministry at a small church in Ohio. Had 5 students. 4 of them were homeschooled. And so imagine the fun of planning that outreach, right? Like, hey guys, bring your friends. We're all here. Like, hey guys, we're going to do See at the Pole. I'm like, we're homeschooled. Dude, I don't care. Like, go to your mailbox. Like, you're praying for someone, And so that's how our ministry started. And we're blessed that we're able to see God work powerful in those students and many more for years to come. By the time we left 5 years later, it was up to about 50 students every week. And we moved from there to a mega church in Atlanta, Georgia that has about 11,000 members. And we're able to minister to students there in 3 different services a week. We had 2 services on Sunday morning, and we had a Wednesday night service, and we're able to minister to about 500 different students in the course of a month, just because we're in a commuter culture. So had awesome. So no matter where you're at, I've been there, and I'm not saying that in a prideful way. This is reality. So if you have 5 kids in the basement of a church, dude, I've been there. If you have 30 kids and you're trying to grow and gain momentum, dude, I've been there. If you have a staff of 5 people and a budget that's bigger than most churches, I've been there. And I want to let you know that the common thread I've recognized between starting out in a small church and going on and working at a big church, the common thing that you lack is not money, because at a big church, we had a nice budget to be able to minister to our students. It's not volunteers. I had a great army of volunteers at a smaller church, as well as the most recent church I worked at. The thing that any church lacks and that your ministry lacks is time. You wish you had more time, because time is a thing that could create any of those other things, right? If you had more time, you could plan fundraising, right? And increase your resources. If you had more time, you could recruit and train more volunteers. If you had more time, you could spend more time with students and be able to minister in a more personal and profound way. So I want to help you create time, and you can't literally create time. Right? We can't create time. So what we must do is look at the time we have and see what part of time there that we could cut to create more time for the important things. Because I'm telling you, the important things in ministry, especially youth ministry, is spending time with your volunteers and spending time with your students. Not necessarily preaching a message, but spending time with your volunteers and spending time with your students. So my goal today is to take the chunk of time you have dedicated to prepping your sermon and preparing your sermon. My goal is for you to be able to cut that time in half. And not so you could write more messages, so you could preach, across the country. My goal for you is to cut that time in half so you can allocate that time to time with your students, time with your volunteers, and time with God, and actually be able to hear from God clearly. And so that's my goal today. And I just want to jump right into this. What are some elements of good preaching? Because I don't want to reduce the time you prepare a message and then all of a sudden your messages stink, that you're not doing justice to the greatest story ever told. That's not my goal. So I want you to have great messages. I want your messages to actually be better, for you to spend less time on your messages and your messages actually improve and your speaking improve. And I believe I have some tips to help you do that. But what are some elements of good preaching? First of all, good preaching always comes from God rather than from man. Good preaching always comes from God rather than from man. If it's coming from man, it's good advice. If it's coming from man, it could be wisdom. But man, if it's coming from God, it inspires, it informs us, and it imparts something into us. It gives us life. It changes us. It's transforming. Good preaching is clear rather than clever. A lot of times, I'll give you an example. I wrote a best-selling book called A Youth Pastor's Manifesto. And in that book, in the draft of that book, I sent it to a friend of mine who works for Awesome Ministry. And he looked at that. He looked at the chapter breakdown. He was like, I don't get it. I don't see what you're trying to do. And because I had all these clever names for the chapters and what each chapter meant, and I created my own kind of pseudo language. He's like, I just don't get it. He's a smart guy. I'm like, man, if he doesn't get it, I don't have a shot. So I changed it all to be like very simple. Like instead of whatever fancy word I had for preaching, I just said preaching. Instead of whatever fancy word I had for programming, I just said programming. And I made it clear. And as a result, it was easier to read. It was easier to understand. And guess what? When it became clear, it became a Amazon bestseller. I was able to be my first best-selling book. Why? Because I was clear. If you want your message to be understood and actionable, it has to be clear. People have to know what you're talking about. So good messages are clear rather than clever. I'd venture to guess that the best messages you've ever heard, you could explain to me in 1 or 2 sentences. Man, Andy Stanley said this, or Judah Smith said this. And you could give me the entire 30, 40-minute talk in 2 sentences. Think about this. TED Talks, right? If you visit TED.com, you're going to hear neurosurgeons talk about 30 years of work in 18 minutes. How can they do that? They're very clear in their message. And so I want to encourage you to become clear rather than clever. Last thing, an element of good preaching is it's applicable rather than abstract. It's applicable rather than abstract. We don't want students to walk away and just be like, wow, so-and-so is a good speaker. We want students to walk away and say, so-and-so is a good God. And as a result, I need to adjust my life accordingly. Or, wow, I've never seen the truth in the scripture before. I need to adjust myself accordingly and address my behavior accordingly. We want students that have their lives transformed, and we want to introduce them to transforming truth. That has to be very applicable and actionable, not abstract and a philosophy. Preaching is a gift, and gifts need to be developed. You know, I love the NBA, and it's interesting because I'm a big LeBron James fan. Guy's a monster, right? 6'8", 250, just a big hulking dude. And you look at him and you're like, dude, God made him to play in the NBA, right? He's built for the NBA. But guess what? Do me a favor and look at the last 10 years of the NBA draft. You're going to see a bunch of guys that are built as big or as strong as him, or even better. You know, they're going to be taller, bigger, faster. And God built them the same way, and God gave them the same gifts. But those people have not developed their gifts the way LeBron has. So I want to encourage you that whatever gift you have, you need to work hard at that gift. You need to make that gift count. Talent is not an excuse not to work hard, and a lack of talent is not an excuse to improve. Maybe you're not the best speaker in the world, but guess what? You could become a little bit better. This year, going into 2016, you can improve your speaking, and that happens through practice. And as you know, not just practice doing the same thing over and over again, but good practice. So I want us to look at, with our time, what are some of the practices of great speakers? What are some of the things that great speakers do that I believe if you do it, one, your quality of your message could become better. You're going to improve your speaking ability, but you're also going to cut your sermon prep time in half. That will allow you to spend more time with your students and your leaders and God. So, practice number one, great speakers create margin. Great speakers create margin. They have time to think about their message, to pray about their message, to find illustrations, to find ideas, video clips. If you think about your better messages, a lot of times there are going to be times when you're speaking for other ministries. Why? It's not because you love that ministry more. Obviously, you love your church the most, but it's because you've had a lot more time to think about it, to dwell on it, and let that message soak. And when you do that, it becomes a better message. So a good speaker has margin. I worked for a mega church with 11,000 members, and people would ask, like, wow, how does your pastor, how does he have the time to deliver the incredible life-giving messages that he's able to do? Simple, because that's what he focuses on. And the majority of his job description is focused on prepping the teaching. And if you look at your favorite speakers out there, the big names, the people that you buy their books, guess what? A lot of their schedule and a lot of their work week is dedicated to working on their message. They have margin. You may not have that margin. Odds are you probably don't have that margin. And I want to encourage you, and this is a little a tangent I want to go on. If you are bivocational, or if your ministry is under 30 students, I want to encourage you that I would not, if I was you, I would not focus my time on the message. You have much more of a limited time frame than most of us. And I would not focus on a message prep. I would YouTube, I would use curriculum. I'll talk about that a little bit later. But you know what? I'd focus on spending time with kids and leaders. I would take what little time you have, the fishes and loaves you have, and spend it on students and leaders, because kids care less about the message. Think about this. If you're taking your kids to a camp or a conference and you're all pumped, like, dude, Carl Lentz is going to be there. Your kids care more about if their best friend is coming and less about who's going to be speaking. You know that, right? So what you need to do is focus on building that friendship culture and focus on knitting those relationships more so than you are at becoming the next Carl Lentz. So I just want to encourage you. Maybe you don't have that margin. That's okay. I want you to use what time you have to focus on relationships. Next skill, next practice that great speakers have is they create a reservoir and have access to a stream. Okay, a lot of times we do this. Man, God, what do you want me to speak on Wednesday? Nothing. Okay, God, what do you want me to speak on Wednesday? It's Tuesday morning. Nothing. God, what do you want me to speak? And we put ourselves in a position where we're writing a message on Wednesday morning for Wednesday night or Sunday afternoon for Sunday night. Let me tell you, that will never create the type of life-giving message consistently that your students deserve to hear, that they need to hear. That's not going to do it. You're going to be inconsistent at best and mediocre at worst. Okay, so I want to encourage you. Great speakers have two things. They have a stream and a reservoir. A stream is what I was just talking about. God, what are you speaking to me? And they have a steady daily stream. I know Andy Stanley listens to dozens of podcasts. I know that, one of the things I do, I listen to a podcast a day. Why? Because after a year, I've heard 365 different messages that are life-changing that I could take and add to a reservoir. I don't preach the same message that I've heard, because that creates that inconsistency. What I do is I take those messages and I put it into a reservoir. I journal about it, I take notes on it, and I put it off to the side. All the classes that I've ever taken, all the textbooks I've read, I put aside. All the personal devotion, I put it aside over here. And then when it comes to write my message, I go back and I pull those things out, and it becomes a reservoir. So you have to separate having a stream, having daily input to make you a better person and a better speaker, and then you take those things out and use it and apply it to your message. And those are just parts later for your message. The next thing I want us to talk about is how to create margin, right? That's what you need. Sorry, I needed caffeine. How to create margin. One thing that I want you to look at is you do need to have more time to become a better speaker. Okay, you need to have more time to work on your messages, become a better speaker. Maybe speaking every week is not been good for you. Maybe it's been awesome for the first few months, and you felt like you're struggling and it's coming at the last second. You need more margin. I would recommend curriculum. use curriculum, right? There's a bunch of stuff out there. XP3 has great stuff. All my curriculum that I've written for the last 3 years, I'm putting out on youthpastoru.org, and you could buy that curriculum. It's 3 to 4 weeks of curriculum for only $10. Okay, it's super cheap. So for $10 a month, you can have 4 messages. It's like, what was that? $2.50 per message, and it comes with a slide graphic that you can use for a slide, as well as manuscript outlines and small group questions. All that's for you, because I believe that you need margin. You need a space that you could focus on students and focus on leaders. And so that becomes a template or a starting block. You go in, write your own illustrations, and I actually have parentheses like, dude, put your own illustration right here. Don't use this story about when I was at the grocery store. You find your own illustration and put it in there. I'll encourage you to do that. Guest speakers, you have volunteers that have a great message. Let them speak, let them share it. That's how you raise up awesome leaders. That's how you gain help. Let your students share their testimonies, okay? I know it's scary, but man, give up the reins a little bit and see what God can do in other people. You know, the way someone invests in you, invest in someone else, all right? The way someone has entrusted you, entrust someone else. The next thing I want to encourage you to do is, if you have not had your senior pastor speak to your students, you're wrong. Dude, I don't care what you think about your senior pastor's speaking style or their level of relevance, but you need to have your senior pastor speak to your students. They're the head of the house. They're the head of the ministry. And you wonder why 80% of kids graduate and they never go to big church. It's because they don't even know who the senior pastor is. Give them the platform to speak at least once a year, a couple times a year. And guess what? When that happens, you have a little bit more margin to focus on your ministry as well. My friend in Ohio, his name's Caleb Schaefer. He has these things called switch nights. Every few weeks, they load up all the students in 15-passenger vans, drive to another church, and enjoy someone else's youth ministry. That's awesome because it builds connection. Their kids gets to walk into a ministry and say, man, we're not the only Christians. They see kids from their own school that they didn't know were Christians, and they're able to connect. There is a unity that's happening within the city of Columbus, Ohio, because of these switch nights. And at the end of the day, it's giving Caleb time to sit and hang out with students instead of being on stage. And that's such a big deal. That's the margin you can create by doing switch nights. YouTube messages. Man, there's a guy named Shane Claiborne, and he has awesome messages. I Googled it, Shane Claiborne, found a high definition message, and posted it on, and we watched it on a big screen. And so I had a world-class speaker come speak to my students for free. You can have Judah Smith speak to your students for free by just downloading a YouTube message and showing it on the screen, okay? Preview it, download it. If you need to edit it for time or content, do that. But man, what a great resource. If you need margin, I want to encourage you to have seasons off. That there are specific seasons. Maybe it's the back end of December right now. Maybe it's July where you don't speak. I haven't spoken in the month of July in a long time. And the reason is because in Atlanta, our school year starts in August. And I want to be ready to go in August to be able to have the vision and have enough messages in a bank that we're able to launch in August extremely well. So I take July off, and I let other staff members or other people in my church speak. I let volunteers in our ministry speak, and I bring in other guest youth pastors to speak, to create enough margin so I could plan and focus for the next season. So great speakers create margin, they have a reservoir, and they have a system. Here's my definition of a system. A system is any procedure that allows you to do something effectively and consistently. So you go to McDonald's, man, no one like daydreams about McDonald's. It's just like, But you know what? You know exactly what you're going to get. And here's a great thing. When you're traveling, you're on a missions trip, man, I remember being in Mexico. I was just like, dude, I know it was Panama. We're in Panama, and I was just like, we saw McDonald's. And everyone on our team was like, you pumped, man. We're like pumped about McDonald's. Why? We knew what it was going to taste like. They have a system in place that create consistency in their food. And I want you to know that you could do the same thing in your messages. And the best speakers do. Andy Stanley talks about it in Communicating for a Change. Me, we, God, you, we. That's his template. Listen to Judah Smith talk. Every one of his talks, he's going to start out with a scripture. He's going to do a funny illustration, talk about that, how that illustration presents a need in humanity that we all have, and then he'll represent that scripture as a solution to the problem. Every speaker has this template that they use over and over again. If you've been speaking for an amount of time, you have a template. Maybe you start out with a joke and you go into the scripture. You start with the scripture and you break down how that scripture applies to our lives today. Whatever it has, you have a template. Be intentional with that template. Because when you're intentional with that template, you're not writing an entire sermon. You're writing out parts to a sermon. So me, we, God, you, we, that's a template Andy Stanley uses. That's a template I use. And it starts with personal illustration, me. We, here's a problem humanity has because we're broken human beings. God, here's a scriptural or biblical truth that is a solution to the we problem. You, here's how you could apply that solution to your life. And we, this is what the world would look, or our church would look differently, how the church would look differently if we apply that truth to our life. And so now, I'm not writing a 30-minute talk. I'm writing 5 parts to a message. And I'll start out with either our problem or the biblical truth. And I'll work my way to the end. And then I go back and I find that initial illustration. Because if you're like me, I waste a lot of times thinking of the illustration. Man, what is a funny story of, what's a great YouTube clip about? And I could sit there for 30 minutes, 2 hours trying to think of an illustration. Man, if you want to cut your time in half so you could spend more time with your students, work your template, and so you're writing parts of your message, not your entire message, all at one time. That's one thing you need with systems is to have a template. Okay, here's some other things that great speakers have as far as systems go. You know, they have a series. Great speakers use series in their approach. So they take a big subject like faith and they break it down. And one of the things I want to do, a second webinar coming up, and you could sign up for it by clicking the Tuesday Toolbox email, and you'll get an email every Tuesday with some kind of youth ministry tool that's going to help you out. You know, I want to do a webinar on how to create a series, but I'll give it to you real quick in about 30 seconds. Okay, if you want to create a series, take a theme. And so here's the theme. Let's say the theme is faith. You need to break that theme down into 4 subjects. So what is faith? That's week 1. 2, how can you develop faith? 3, here are the rewards of faith. 4 is here's some inspirational testimonies about faith and what faith has done in other people's lives. So now you have 4 subjects, right? You have 4 subjects. And I would, even before you ever write a message, is to tie a scriptural theme to each of those subjects. Okay, so for what is faith, you can look at Hebrews, and faith is not is the evidence of things hoped for, the substance of things not seen, and maybe that's your key scripture, and you add a scripture to each one of those. So before you ever write a sermon, you have your theme, your subject, and your scripture. And now you have enough tools you're building off of. What is the hardest thing about writing a paper? Think back when you're in high school, college, seminary. Staring at that blank page. If you have a series, you're never staring at a blank page. You have enough substance to start out well. You know, another system is having a set day for your sermon prep. For me, it was every Monday at 1:30. I'd go out to lunch, I'd come back in the office, and I'd lock myself in the office from 1:30 to 3:30, and I'd write my message for the week. I did that every single week, even if I wasn't speaking. So in July, I wrote 4 messages and didn't preach any. So I had all of August. I was always ahead. I was always at least a week ahead, sometimes 2, 4, even 6 weeks ahead. But I am able to do that if I write a message consistently. And when you do something consistently, you cut your time in half. You become more efficient. You become better at it because you know, your body knows, your mind knows at 1:30, I'm writing a message on Monday. You know, and I think that's a good practice for you. There's a specific location I would write my message. You know, there's a specific style. I had my computer set up. I had certain books with me. I had a journal with me. I always ate lunch before I wrote a message, but I always had a cup of coffee with me while I was writing a message. I didn't want to have to get up for anything. This is my time, concentrated 2 hours or more in a chair, focused on writing a message. That's what I would do. And so if you want to become a better speaker, it will cut your time in half. I'm telling you, it will cut your time in half to have a set date every time you write a message. I already talked about the template, how important that is. If you do that, again, you're writing parts of a message, not the message as a whole, and it allows things to move progressively smoother. You'll find that you'll actually become faster when you break a big goal down into smaller parts, because it's motivating to just be like, wow, I already got this accomplished, I already got 3/4 or 3/5 of my message done, and it motivates you instead of saying, oh, I only got 3/4 of a page done. It'll just help you out. Separate the talk from the translation. All right, we're missionaries. You don't go to high school, but you're preaching to high school kids. You're not a teenager. Stop acting like one, by the way. You're not a teenager, but you're ministering to teenagers. So what that means is we're missionaries. We're missionaries. We're grown adults trying to reach another culture, which is young people. So build your message. And then I talked about this earlier. Then work on a translation. Okay, imagine if I'm going to go and preach in Chiapas, Mexico. One of the things I would do is I would write the message, and then I would worry about how to translate it later, right? I want to get the bulk of my message. This is what I have for these people from the Lord and what I believe God is telling me. And then I would work on how to translate that later on, working with a translator. I think the same thing is true with teenagers. Here's the message. This is the irreducible truth that will, if applied, could change a teenager's life. Here it is. Then look for the translation and how to translate that. All right, look for the YouTube clips. Look for the funny illustrations. A couple things I do, and you'll see this in an ebook I'm going to give you for free if you went through this webinar, is I survey students. So I have 5 or 6 students in a group text message, and there'll be times where I'm like, hey, give me an example of when you felt alone. All right, give me a couple struggles or a couple results of insecurities. What happens when you're insecure? And I'll get the illustrations from students. Sometimes I'll post it on social media like Facebook or Instagram, and kids will comment their own stories. And I ask for permission, like, dude, can I use this story? I think it could help people. And then what happens? Kids lean in, because they want to hear their story and their message. And it's so much more relatable than a 30-year-old person saying, hey, when I was in high school, I did this. Okay, you are a missionary. Separate the talk from the translation. Last thing I want you to do is, as we're wrapping up here, is I want you to imitate other speakers. And I know it's just like, oh, we're supposed to hear from the Lord. It's like, yeah, but speaking is really an art. It truly is. And to become a better artist, you imitate good artists. And so I'm telling you, I imitated Judah Smith for the longest time. I was baby Judah Smith, except I was definitely less hip and less effective as a speaker. But I mimicked his voice until I learned my voice. We do that in every skill, right? In basketball, we are watching other basketball players to become better basketball players, right? We're watching tape of other players to become better basketball players, or other golf swings or baseball swings to become better at our sport. As a writer, you're reading other people's writing to become a better writer yourself. As a musician, you don't start out composing and writing songs. You start out by playing other people's songs, and then you learn your own voice and how to become, and then you write your own songs. The same is true with preaching. Listen to other people, imitate some of the things they say, use some of the ideas from their message, steal from their message. That's okay. We're all working from the same 2,000-year-old book, so nothing new is under the sun. Use some of the things they say. Cite them. Have integrity. Don't pretend it's yours, but use other people and listen to their voice and mimic their voice until you develop your own. Hey, I'm out of time. I hope this has blessed you. Like I said, if you have not signed up for the Tuesday Toolbox email, every Tuesday I send a youth ministry resource out just like this webinar with a bunch of free stuff, because I've been in this thing for almost a decade, and I know how hard and how lonely and honestly how expensive resources can be. So I just want to bless you for free every Tuesday. Sign up below to get more of that stuff. And thanks so much for taking the time to watch this webinar. God bless.